After my divorce, my parents asked me and my kids to move in. But when my brother had a baby, my kids were pushed into the basement so his family could take over. We moved out that same day. I'm 35, and until 2 years ago, I thought I had my life figured out. Then my marriage fell apart, and suddenly I found myself packing up my 10-year-old twins Lily and Owen trying to figure out where we'd go next. My parents offered their house without hesitation. "Come stay with us," Mom said over the phone, her voice warm with concern. "You and the kids can have the upstairs bedrooms. It'll be perfect while you get back on your feet." At the time, it felt like a blessing. Dad even helped me move our furniture, and they seemed genuinely excited to have their grandchildren around every day. The first few months were actually wonderful. The kids adapted well to their new school, and I loved coming home from 12-hour shifts to find them doing homework at the kitchen table while Mom made dinner. It felt like family in the best possible way. But I should have paid more attention to the small comments, the little signs that should have warned me what was coming. "You know, honey," Mom would say while folding laundry, "maybe you should consider dating again. You're not getting any younger, and the kids need a father figure." Or Dad would mention how my younger brother Ryan was really making something of himself at his marketing job, always with this tone that suggested I wasn't quite measuring up. Ryan had always been the golden child. 3 years younger than me, he'd coasted through college while I worked 2 jobs to pay for nursing school. When he graduated, our parents helped him with the down payment on his first apartment. When I graduated, they gave me a card with $50 in it. But I'd made peace with that years ago, or so I thought. The twins seemed happy enough. They loved having their grandparents around, and I was grateful for the help. I was working overtime whenever possible, squirreling away money in a savings account. The plan was to stay maybe 6 months, just long enough to build up a solid financial cushion and find the right place for us. What I didn't realize was that my parents had gotten comfortable with the arrangement too. Very comfortable. "There's no rush," Mom would say whenever I mentioned looking at apartments. "Why pay rent when you're helping us out here? And the kids love it." It was true that they seemed to love it. Owen had found a group of friends in the neighborhood who played basketball at the community center, and Lily had joined the school choir. For the first time since the divorce, they seemed settled. I started keeping a notebook where I tracked our expenses and savings goals, writing down every detail of our progress toward independence. It became a small ritual, updating those numbers each week, proof that we were building something solid. The kids would sometimes peek over my shoulder and ask about the calculations, and I'd explain how we were saving for our own place, our own fresh start. What I couldn't have predicted was how dramatically everything would change when Ryan called with his big news. I remember exactly where I was standing in the kitchen when he made the announcement that would shift the entire balance of our family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was helping Owen with his math homework when the phone rang and Mom practically flew across the kitchen to answer it. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Ryan. Oh, sweetheart." The excitement in her voice was unmistakable. "Slow down. Tell me again." She grabbed Dad's arm, pulling him closer to the phone. "A baby." Oh my goodness. When I watched my parents transform before my eyes, Dad started pacing, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Mom was crying happy tears, asking a million questions about due dates and doctor appointments. Lily and Owen looked up from their homework, curious about all the commotion. "Your Uncle Ryan and Aunt Katie are having a baby," I explained, and they seemed pleased enough. They liked their uncle, though they didn't see him very often since he lived across town with his wife of 2 years. What I didn't anticipate was how completely this pregnancy would consume my parents' world. Within a week, Mom had purchased 3 pregnancy books and started calling Katie daily to check on morning sickness symptoms. Dad began researching baby gear with the intensity he'd once reserved for buying cars. Every conversation somehow circled back to the coming grandchild. "This is different," Mom confided to me one evening while we were cleaning up dinner. "Don't get me wrong, I love Lily and Owen dearly, but I was working full-time when they were babies. I barely got to enjoy their early years the way I should have. This time I'll be retired. I can really be present." I felt a strange twist in my stomach at her words. She'd been present for my kids in her way, but I understood what she meant. This would be her first grandchild where she could be the doting grandmother without the complications of her own career demands. The changes started small. The weekly dinner outings with the twins became less frequent because Katie needed Mom to drive her to doctor appointments. The Saturday morning pancake tradition got skipped when Dad started assembling a crib he'd bought months before the baby would even need it. "Grandma's just excited," I told the kids when they asked why she seemed so distracted lately. But privately, I was starting to feel like we were becoming background players in our own living situation. By the time baby Marcus was born in October, the house had already been transformed. The dining room that the twins had used for art projects and homework became a nursery complete with a changing station rocking chair and more baby supplies than any one child could possibly need. The good dishes got moved to the basement to make room for bottles and formula and an elaborate sterilizing system. I'll never forget holding Marcus for the first time. This tiny, perfect person with Ryan's dark hair and Katie's nose. He was beautiful and I loved him immediately. But watching my parents with him was like watching people I'd never met before. They were completely, utterly enchanted. "Look at those fingers," Dad whispered, letting Marcus grip his thumb. He's going to be so smart, I can tell already. Mom couldn't put him down. She'd cancel plans with friends just to babysit when Ryan and Katie wanted a date night. She learned about sleep schedules and feeding routines with the dedication of someone taking final exams. The twins were sweet about their new cousin, but I could see them processing the shift in attention. Owen asked me one night why Grandma and Grandpa seemed to love Marcus more than them. They don't love him more, I assured him, though I wasn't entirely certain myself. They're just excited because he's a baby. Remember how excited we all were when you and Lily were born? But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't quite the same thing. Christmas that year was when everything became impossible to ignore. I'd spent weeks carefully budgeting for presents, making sure the twins would have a magical morning despite everything we'd been through with the divorce. I'd bought them each a bike, some art supplies, and books from their wish lists. But when Christmas morning arrived, the disparity was stunning. Marcus, who was barely 2 months old and couldn't even focus his eyes properly, yet had presents piled around him like he was royalty. A high-end stroller that cost more than I made in a week, designer clothes he'd outgrow in a month, toys meant for children years older than him. Lily and Owen each got one small gift from their grandparents, a $20 gift card to a bookstore. Books are important, Mom said cheerfully when she saw my expression. We want to encourage their reading. Meanwhile, she was unwrapping Marcus's 16th present, an electronic baby monitor system with video capabilities and smartphone integration. The twins handled it with more grace than I did. They thanked their grandparents politely and seemed genuinely excited about picking out new books. But I watched Owen's face when Dad spent 20 minutes setting up Marcus's bouncy seat, cooing over how the music feature would help with brain development. Mom Lily whispered to me later, while everyone was fussing over Marcus's first Christmas photos, "Why did Marcus get so many presents when he can't even play with them yet?" I didn't have a good answer for her. The comments started getting more pointed too. Mom began suggesting that maybe I should do something different with my hair, that I looked tired all the time and should consider makeup. She'd never criticized my appearance before, but suddenly everything about me seemed to invite improvement suggestions. "You know, if you dressed up a little more, you might meet someone," she'd say while we were folding laundry. "Katie always looks so put together. Maybe you could ask her for advice." Dad started questioning my parenting decisions more openly. When I said no to buying Owen expensive basketball shoes, Dad would mutter about how kids needed to feel confident, how the right equipment mattered. When I enforced bedtime rules, he'd suggest I was being too strict, that childhood should be fun. But the most painful part was watching how they interacted with the twins versus Marcus. With my kids, they were loving but practical grandparents. They'd help with homework, drive to soccer practice, attend school plays. But with Marcus, they were absolutely besotted. Every sound he made was brilliant. Every facial expression was remarkable. He smiled. Mom would shriek, calling everyone to witness Marcus's gas-induced facial movements. "Did you see? He's so advanced for his age." I started taking the twins out more on weekends, just the three of us. We'd go to the movies or the children's museum, anywhere that felt like our own space. I'd watch other families and wonder if this was normal. This feeling of being constantly evaluated and found lacking in my own supposed home. I like it when it's just us. Owen told me one Saturday after we'd spent the afternoon at the park. We were sitting on a bench sharing ice cream, and he seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. "Me too, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Why do you like it?" "Because you're not sad when it's just us." That hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how transparent my frustration had become, how much the kids were picking up on the tension I thought I was hiding. That night, I updated my savings notebook with renewed determination. We had enough now for a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment. The original plan had been to stay until spring to build up an even more substantial cushion, but I was starting to wonder if the emotional cost was worth the financial benefit. I just hadn't realized yet how much worse things were about to get. The announcement came in February, almost 2 years after we'd moved in with my parents. I was getting ready for work when Ryan called, and I could hear the stress in his voice immediately. "Hey sis, is Mom there?" He sounded frazzled, which was unusual for my typically composed brother. Mom took the phone eagerly, as she always did when Ryan called, but her expression quickly shifted from delight to concern to determination. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. How long do you think the renovation will take?" I paused in packing my work bag, trying to piece together the conversation from her side of it. 6 to 8 weeks. "That's not too bad. Yes, of course you can stay here. There's plenty of room." My stomach dropped. I walked closer, trying to catch Dad's eye, but he was nodding along supportively, already mentally rearranging furniture. "What renovation?" I asked after Mom hung up. "Oh, Ryan and Katie need to stay here for a while," Mom said breezily, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "They're having some work done on their house. Something about water damage in the kitchen and bathroom. The whole place needs to be gutted for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer, depending on how the work goes. You know how these things can drag on." Dad was already pulling out a notepad, making lists. "We'll need to move some things around, make sure everyone's comfortable." What struck me most was that none of them seemed to think this required any discussion with me. I'd been living there with my children for almost 2 years, contributing to groceries and utilities, helping with household maintenance and elder care tasks. But the decision to add 3 more people to the house, including a baby, was made without even mentioning it to me beforehand. "Where exactly are they going to sleep?" I asked. trying to keep my voice level. Well, they'll need the guest room, obviously. And we'll set up the nursery and the den for Marcus. Mom was already moving into planning mode. It'll be lovely having everyone under one roof like a real family compound. The guest room was where I'd been storing the twins' outgrown clothes and seasonal items. The den was where the kids did their homework and played video games on rainy days. In one phone call, our living space had just shrunk considerably. When are they moving in? I asked. This weekend. Ryan wants to get started on the renovation right away. This weekend. 3 days' notice for a living arrangement that would last at least 2 months. That evening, I sat the twins down to explain the situation. They took it better than I did. Actually excited about having baby Marcus around more often. Kids are adaptable in ways adults forget to be. But I was doing math in my head, and it wasn't good math. 7 people in a 4-bedroom house, with one of those people being a baby who would wake up at all hours. 1 bathroom upstairs, 1 bathroom downstairs, a kitchen that already felt crowded when all of us were trying to get ready for work and school at the same time. It'll be fine, I told myself, updating my savings calculations that night. It's temporary. We can handle temporary. I started looking at rental listings more seriously, bookmarking places that seemed promising. The market had gotten more expensive in the past year, but we could manage it. The question was whether I wanted to wait until spring as originally planned, or start looking for something sooner. Mom, are you okay? Lily asked from the doorway of my room, catching me staring at apartment websites on my laptop. Just looking at some options for us, I said, patting the bed so she'd come sit with me. How would you feel about having our own place again? She considered this seriously the way she approached most questions. I like living with Grandma and Grandpa, but sometimes I miss when it was just us 3. What do you miss about it? I don't know. It was quieter, I guess. And you seemed happier, out of the mouths of babes. I kissed the top of her head and closed the laptop. We'll figure it out. Okay. But even as I said it, I knew that the next 2 months were going to test every limit I had. The invasion began on Saturday morning. Ryan showed up with a U-Haul truck, and Katie carrying Marcus as if they were refugees fleeing a disaster zone, instead of people who'd chosen to gut their perfectly functional kitchen on a whim. Within hours, the house transformed into something I didn't recognize. The guest room filled with their furniture, clothes, and enough baby supplies to stock a small store. The den became Marcus's domain, with a crib-changing station and play area that took up most of the space where the twins used to spread out their homework. But it was the rules that really got to me, rules that were implemented immediately and without discussion. We'll need to keep noise to a minimum during Marcus's nap times, Katie announced, while unpacking approximately the 15th box of baby clothes. He's very sensitive to sound, and his sleep schedule is crucial for his development. Marcus napped 3 times a day for varying lengths of time that seemed to change based on mysterious baby logic that only Katie could interpret. Also, we should probably put away most of the toys in the living room. She continued, eyeing the twins' books and art supplies with obvious distaste. Babies explore everything orally, and I'm concerned about choking hazards. Within the first week, Lily and Owen had lost access to most of the common areas of the house. They couldn't watch television in the living room because it might wake Marcus. They couldn't play in the den because that was his nursery now. They couldn't do arts and crafts at the kitchen table because baby supplies covered every surface. Why don't you kids play in your rooms? Mom suggested cheerfully when Owen complained about being bored. Their rooms were small, meant for sleeping, not for the kind of active play that 10-year-olds need. But pointing this out somehow made me the unreasonable one. The television situation was particularly galling. The twins had always been allowed to watch their shows after homework was finished, but now even that simple pleasure became complicated. Could you turn that down? Katie would call from upstairs even when the volume was barely audible. Marcus is trying to sleep. Or Ryan would wander into the living room and change the channel without asking, claiming he wanted to catch the news, leaving Lily and Owen staring at him in confusion. Can we finish our show? Lily asked politely one evening. This is important, Ryan replied, not even looking at her. You can watch cartoons anytime. I watched my children's faces, saw them learning that their wants and needs were less important than any adult's passing whim. That their comfort in what had been their home for 2 years was now secondary to a baby's sleep schedule and their uncle's television preferences. The breaking point came when Mom announced that we'd need to reorganize the twins' belongings because Marcus was getting more mobile and might get into things. More mobile, I asked. He's 6 months old. He can barely sit up. Katie says he's very advanced for his age. We need to be proactive about safety. So the twins' art supplies got moved to high shelves they couldn't reach without help. Their books were relocated to their bedrooms to make space for more baby gates and safety equipment. Their drawings came down from the refrigerator to make room for Marcus's feeding schedule and doctor appointment reminders. I watched my children adapt to these changes with a grace that broke my heart. They didn't complain, didn't throw tantrums, didn't demand their territory back. They just quietly accepted that they mattered less, that their needs were less important. It's okay, Mom, Owen said, when I apologized for yet another canceled plan because Marcus was having a difficult day. We understand, but they shouldn't have had to understand. They were children, and this was supposed to be their home too. That night, I pulled out my savings notebook and ran the numbers again. We had enough now, more than enough actually. I'd been saving for 2 years, and my financial cushion was larger than it had ever been. The question was no longer whether we could afford to leave. The question was whether I could afford to stay. The breaking point came in early April, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Owen had been fighting a spring cold that triggered his asthma, something he'd dealt with since he was tiny. I'd called in his prescription refill to the pharmacy and was getting ready to pick it up when Dad intercepted me in the kitchen. $47 for an inhaler, he said, holding the automated message slip. That seems excessive. Are you sure he really needs the name brand version? I stared at him in disbelief. It's his rescue inhaler, Dad. The generic version doesn't work as well for him, and his doctor specifically prescribed this one. But $47, he repeated, as if I hadn't heard him the first time. Maybe you should talk to the doctor about alternatives. This conversation was happening at the same kitchen table where 2 days earlier, I'd watched him unbox a high chair for Marcus that cost $400. A high chair for a baby who wouldn't even start solid foods for another month. The high chair was different, Mom said when I pointed out this discrepancy later. That was a gift, and it's an investment piece that will last for years. Owen's inhaler is also an investment, I said quietly, in his ability to breathe. But somehow, I was being unreasonable again. The music lessons were next to go. Lily had been taking piano lessons for 18 months and was actually quite good. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, came to the house every Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and Lily always spent the whole day looking forward to it. I'm sorry, Mom told Mrs. Patterson at the door one Tuesday, but we're going to have to cancel lessons for a while. The piano playing disrupts the baby's afternoon nap. Lily's face crumpled. She'd been practicing a piece for the spring recital, something she'd been excited about for weeks. Maybe we could schedule the lessons for a different time, I suggested. Mrs. Patterson's schedule is full at other times, Mom said dismissively. And honestly, piano lessons are a luxury. Lily can always pick it up again later. Later, always later. Everything that mattered to my children could wait, but Marcus's schedule was sacred and unchangeable. The final straw was the refrigerator. The twins had been putting their school artwork on the fridge since they were old enough to hold crayons. It was a tradition, a way of celebrating their creativity and achievements. But when I came home from a particularly brutal shift at the hospital, I found the refrigerator completely rearranged. All of Lily and Owen's drawings, honor roll certificates, and school photos had been taken down and organized into a folder that Katie had helpfully placed on top of the refrigerator where no one would see them. The entire front of the fridge was now covered with Marcus's feeding schedule, his growth chart, his vaccination records, and approximately 15 photos of him doing typical baby things like lying on blankets and drooling. It looks so much cleaner this way, Katie said when she saw me staring at the bare spots where my children's achievements used to hang. And it's more functional for tracking Marcus' needs. I took the folder down from the top of the refrigerator and looked through it. 2 years' worth of my children's pride and joy, reduced to clutter to be hidden away. Where should I put these, I asked, holding up a drawing Lily had made of our family. Maybe in their bedrooms, Katie suggested. Or you could start a scrapbook. That night, while everyone else was sleeping, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started seriously looking at rental properties. Not just browsing anymore, but actually calculating utilities and measuring furniture in my head, imagining how we'd arrange our things in different spaces. I found a duplex about 15 minutes from the kids' school with a small backyard and 2 bedrooms upstairs. The rent was manageable, and the landlord seemed reasonable when I called to ask about the application process. When would you be looking to move in? He asked. I looked around the kitchen at the refrigerator covered with someone else's priorities, at the high chair that cost more than my child's medicine, at the evidence of how thoroughly we'd been erased from what was supposed to be our temporary home. How soon is too soon? I asked. I could have it ready by the 1st of May if you can pass the credit check and provide references. May 1st was 3 weeks away. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I said, my heart already pounding with a mixture of terror and excitement. For the first time in months, I was remembering what it felt like to make decisions about my own life. I didn't tell anyone about my phone call with the landlord. Instead, I did what I always did when I needed to think clearly. I went to work and talked to Angela. Angela was my closest colleague at the hospital, a woman in her 40s who'd raised 3 kids mostly on her own and had a way of cutting through emotional confusion with surgical precision. We'd worked together for 5 years, and she knew enough about my family situation to ask the right questions. So, let me get this straight, she said during our lunch break, after I told her about the refrigerator incident. Your parents invited you to live with them temporarily, but now they've essentially handed your living space over to your brother and his family, and you're expected to just accept it. It's more complicated than that, I started to say, but she held up a hand. Is it though? You pay rent there, right? I contribute to expenses. Yes. You help with household work, cooking, taking care of your parents when they need it. Of course. And your kids have been model house guests for 2 years, helping with chores, being respectful, not causing problems. I nodded, seeing where this was going. So you're a tenant and a caregiver and a daughter, but somehow you have no voice in household decisions that directly affect your children's well-being and happiness. When she put it like that, it sounded even worse than I'd realized. What would you do? I asked her. I'd get the hell out of there, she said without hesitation. Life's too short to teach your kids that they don't matter. That afternoon, I called the landlord back and filled out the rental application. I had excellent credit, solid employment history, and strong references. By the end of the week, I'd signed the lease and put down the security deposit. The duplex was perfect for us. Hardwood floors throughout big windows that let in lots of light, a kitchen where we could eat breakfast together without navigating around baby equipment. The bedrooms were small but cozy, and there was a basement where the kids could play on rainy days without worrying about waking anyone up. I scheduled the utilities to be connected, researched internet providers, even bought a small refrigerator magnet in the shape of a star, imagining Lily's artwork displayed prominently in our new kitchen. The hardest part was keeping it secret. Every day I watched my children adapt to new restrictions, saw them become quieter and more careful, watched them learn to take up less space in the world, and every day I reminded myself that in just a few weeks they'd have their voices back. "Are you okay, Mom?" Owen asked one evening when he caught me staring out the window with what must have been a strange expression on my face. "I'm planning something," I told him honestly, "something good for us." "What kind of something?" "It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it." He seemed satisfied with that answer, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. These kids had been through enough upheaval in their short lives. They deserved stability, but they also deserved a home where they mattered. I picked up moving boxes during my lunch break and hid them in my car trunk. I researched moving companies and got quotes for local moves. I updated my address with the bank and the kids' school, preparing for a transfer that I hoped would be seamless. The most challenging part was timing. I needed to tell my family about the move, but I wanted to wait until everything was set in stone, until there was no possibility of them talking me out of it or creating drama that would upset the children. I planned to tell them on a Saturday morning when everyone would be home and we could have a family meeting. I'd explain that we'd found a place, that it was time for us to have our own space again, that this had always been the plan. What I hadn't planned for was how dramatically everything would explode before I got the chance. Looking back, I should have known that living with 7 people in one house with that much tension and imbalanced priorities was like sitting on a powder keg. But I thought I had a few more weeks to plan our graceful exit. I thought I could control the timeline of our departure. I was wrong. The emergency started while I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift at the hospital. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was checking on a 6-year-old patient recovering from appendix surgery when my phone started buzzing with texts from the twins. The first message from Lily was relatively calm. "Mom, Grandma says we need to move our stuff to make room for something. Can you call when you get a break?" But Owen's messages, coming in rapid succession, told a different story. "Mom, they're moving all our things. They put our clothes in garbage bags. Grandma says we have to sleep in the basement now. Lily is crying. Can you come home, please? They won't let us call you." My hands were shaking as I read the messages. I stepped into the supply closet to call home, but the phone went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I found my supervisor and explained the situation as briefly as possible. Family emergency. Had to leave immediately. She looked at my face and didn't ask questions, just told me to go. The drive home felt endless. I kept calling the house phone and getting voicemail, which meant someone was deliberately not answering. I called Ryan's cell phone. Voicemail. Katie's phone. Voicemail. Finally, Lily answered her own phone, speaking in a whisper. "Mom, they moved us to the basement," she said, and I could hear that she'd been crying. "They said Marcus needs our rooms because the nursery upstairs is too small and babies need more space than big kids do. Where is everyone else?" I asked, taking the corner onto our street faster than I should have. "Downstairs helping move stuff. Mom, the basement is really humid and it smells weird and there are bugs." I pulled into the driveway and saw exactly what I'd feared. Ryan's truck was parked outside, and through the living room window, I could see him carrying the twins' dresser toward the stairs, moving their furniture to the basement without consulting me, without even waiting for me to get home from work. I walked into my parents' house and found organized chaos. Mom was directing the operation like a general, telling people where to put furniture and which clothes could stay upstairs versus which ones needed to be stored in the basement. Dad was carrying the twins' bookshelf, looking uncomfortable, but going along with the plan. Katie was standing in what used to be Lily's room, measuring windows for new curtains, while Marcus napped in his travel crib. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, my voice louder than I'd intended. "Oh, you're home early," Mom said, as if this was all perfectly normal. "We decided to do some reorganizing while the kids were at school. Marcus really needs more space, and the basement will be perfect for Lily and Owen. It's like having their own apartment down there." I walked downstairs to see what they'd done to my children's living space. The basement was damp, poorly lit, and smelled like mildew. Despite Dad's attempts to run a dehumidifier, they'd shoved the twins' beds into one corner, creating a cramped sleeping area that looked more like a storage room than bedrooms. "This is unacceptable," I said, coming back upstairs. "You can't just move children into a basement without discussing it with their parent." "It's temporary," Ryan said, not meeting my eyes. "Just until we finish the renovation on our house. Your renovation was supposed to take 6 weeks. It's been 3 months. These things take time," Katie said, bouncing Marcus, who'd woken up from his nap. "And honestly, the kids are getting older. They need to learn to be more flexible." More flexible. That's what they called it when my 10-year-old children were expected to give up their bedrooms, their living space, their dignity, so that a baby could have more room to crawl around. Pack your things, I told Lily and Owen, who were standing at the bottom of the basement stairs looking lost and overwhelmed. We're leaving tonight. Leaving. Mom looked genuinely shocked. What do you mean leaving? I mean we're moving out. Tonight. This arrangement isn't working anymore. Don't be ridiculous, Dad said. Where would you go? You can't just pack up and leave with no plan? That's when I realized they truly believed I was helpless, that I had no options beyond accepting whatever they decided was best for our living situation. They'd gotten so comfortable treating me like a dependent teenager that they'd forgotten I was a 35-year-old professional with my own resources. I have a plan, I said calmly. I've had a plan for weeks. The room went quiet. Even Marcus stopped fussing. What kind of plan? Mom asked, and I could hear the first hint of uncertainty in her voice. The kind where my children have their own bedrooms and don't have to live in a basement like refugees in their own family. You're overreacting, Ryan said, but he didn't sound as confident as usual. It's just a temporary arrangement. Nothing about this has been temporary. Your 6-week renovation has turned into 3 months, and now you're taking over the entire upstairs of the house. Meanwhile, my kids lose their living space, their activities, their sense of home, and I'm supposed to just accept it because Marcus needs room to grow. I looked at each of them in turn. Did any of you ask the twins how they felt about moving to the basement? Did anyone consider that maybe 10-year-olds deserve basic dignity and comfort? They're resilient, Katie said. Kids adapt. Kids shouldn't have to adapt to being treated like second-class citizens in their own home. I walked over to where Lily and Owen were standing still, looking confused by the sudden chaos. Go upstairs and pack everything important to you, I told them. Clothes, books, anything you don't want to leave behind. We're staying somewhere else tonight. Where? Lily asked. I'll figure it out, but not here. As the twins headed upstairs, the family meeting I'd been planning for weeks happened anyway, just not on my terms. You can't be serious about this, Mom said, over a bedroom arrangement. We're family. Family doesn't move children into basements without consulting their mother, I replied. Family doesn't cancel a child's music lessons because a baby needs quiet. Family doesn't take down kids' artwork to make room for feeding schedules. We've been trying to accommodate everyone, Dad said. No, you've been accommodating Ryan and Katie and Marcus. My children have been expected to accommodate everyone else. Ryan finally looked directly at me. So what? You're just going to storm out like a drama queen. Hurt Mom and Dad's feelings because you can't handle a little inconvenience. Inconvenience! I felt something snap inside me. Watching my children learn that their needs don't matter is not an inconvenience, Ryan. It's damaging, and I won't let them learn those lessons because their uncle and aunt can't manage their own housing situation. That's not fair, Katie said, holding Marcus tighter. We didn't ask for water damage. You didn't ask for it, but you certainly took advantage of it. Your 6-week emergency has become a complete takeover of my children's home. The twins came back downstairs with their backpacks and a few bags of clothes. They looked scared, but determined, trusting me to figure out what came next. Where will you go? Mom asked, and for the first time she sounded worried rather than annoyed. We'll stay with my friend Angela tonight, I said, pulling out my phone to text her, and after that we'll figure it out. This is ridiculous, Ryan said. You're making a huge mistake over nothing. I looked at him holding his son standing in the house our parents owned, surrounded by his furniture and his wife, and his complete confidence that the world would always accommodate his needs. The mistake, I said quietly, was thinking that my children and I could ever be anything more than an inconvenience to this family. I helped the twins carry their things to the car while my parents stood in the driveway looking shocked that their compliant daughter had suddenly developed a backbone. Call us when you come to your senses, Mom said as I buckled the kids into their seats. I'll call you when you come to yours, I replied. As we drove away, Owen asked, Are we really not going back? Not to live there, I said, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. Is that okay with you? He nodded solemnly. I didn't like the basement. It was scary. I know, buddy. You won't have to sleep there ever again. For the first time in months, that felt like a promise I could keep. Angela opened her front door before I even had a chance to knock, having received my desperate text during the drive over. She took one look at our bags and the twins' subdued faces and ushered us inside without questions. The guest room has bunk beds, she told Lily and Owen. My kids are at their dad's this weekend, so you'll have plenty of space. Are you hungry? While the kids settled in and Angela made them sandwiches, I called the landlord of the duplex. Even though our move-in date wasn't for another 2 weeks, I had to ask if there was any way we could get in sooner. Actually, the previous tenant moved out early, he said. I could have it ready by Monday if you need it. The utilities are already connected. Monday was 4 days away. I could manage 4 days. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of phone calls and logistics. I arranged for a moving truck, contacted the twins' school about transferring their records, and went shopping for basic household supplies. Angela's kids came home Sunday evening and immediately adopted Lily and Owen as temporary siblings, making the whole situation feel less like a crisis and more like an adventure. Your mom is really brave, I overheard Angela's daughter telling Lily while they were playing board games. Why, Lily asked. Because she chose you guys over everything else. That's what brave people do. Monday morning came faster than I expected. The moving truck arrived at my parents' house at 8 a.m., and I steeled myself for what I knew would be a difficult confrontation. Mom answered the door looking like she hadn't slept well. "You're really doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I really am." "Where are you moving to?" I gave her the address of the duplex, watching her face change as she realized I hadn't been bluffing about having a plan. "How long have you been planning this?" Dad asked, appearing behind her. "Since you made it clear that my children's well-being was less important than my brother's convenience." Ryan emerged from the kitchen holding Marcus, looking rumpled and irritated. "So, you're really going to punish all of us because you didn't like a housing arrangement?" "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, directing the movers toward the stairs. "I'm protecting my children." What happened next surprised everyone, including me, as the movers carried our furniture out of the house. Katie started crying. "I didn't know," she said, bouncing Marcus nervously. "I didn't realize the kids were so upset about everything. I thought they were okay with the changes." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She was young, overwhelmed with new motherhood, and probably genuinely hadn't considered how her demands were affecting anyone else. "The kids were okay with the changes because they're good kids who've been taught to be polite and accommodating," I said. "But being okay with something and being happy about it are two very different things." "Maybe we could work something out," Mom said desperately. "Move some things around. Give everyone more space." "It's too late for that," I replied. "This isn't about the basement or the bedrooms. It's about the fact that for 3 months, you've made decisions about my children's lives without consulting me, and you genuinely don't understand why that's a problem." "We were trying to help everyone," Dad said. "You were helping Ryan and Katie. My kids were expected to manage the inconvenience." As our belongings disappeared into the moving truck, I watched my family grapple with the reality that their plans hadn't included my consent and that I was no longer willing to go along with arrangements I'd never agreed to. "What about Sunday dinners?" Mom asked. "Will you still come for Sunday dinners?" I looked at her standing in the doorway of the house where my children had learned to make themselves smaller, quieter, less important. "I'll think about it," I said. The drive to our new home took 15 minutes. 15 minutes from the house where we'd been unwelcome guests to the place where we'd be a family again. As we pulled into the driveway of the duplex, Lily said, "It looks like a real house." "It is a real house," I told her. "It's our house." That night, after we'd set up beds and unpacked the essentials, the three of us sat on the living room floor eating pizza and making plans. Real plans for our own space, our own rules, our own lives. "Can I put my drawings on the refrigerator?" Lily asked. "You can put your drawings wherever you want," I said. "This is your home too." Owen was quiet for a long time, then said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." "Why?" "Because you picked us." And that right there was why leaving had been the only choice that mattered. 6 months after we moved out, my life looked completely different, and so did I. The twins had settled into their new school, beautifully making friends and joining activities that no longer had to be scheduled around someone else's nap time. Lily was taking piano lessons again, and Owen had joined the school's basketball team. More surprisingly, I'd been promoted to charge nurse on my unit at the hospital. The confidence I'd found in finally standing up for my children seemed to translate into other areas of my life. I was speaking up in meetings, taking on leadership roles, making decisions with the clarity that comes from knowing your own worth. We'd bought a house not renting anymore, but actually owning a small 3-bedroom home with a fenced backyard where the kids could play without worrying about noise levels. The mortgage payment was manageable, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were building something permanent and secure. The twins were thriving in ways I hadn't expected. They were louder, more confident, more willing to take up space in the world. It was as if removing them from an environment where they'd learned to minimize themselves had allowed their personalities to bloom again. Meanwhile, my parents' calls had become increasingly desperate. It started about 2 months after we moved out, when Mom called to tell me that Ryan and Katie's renovation was taking longer than expected, and they'd probably need to stay at the house indefinitely. "How is that my problem?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. "It's not your problem," she said quickly. "I just thought you'd want to know. Family news." But the calls kept coming. Dad telling me that Ryan was stressed about the renovation costs, Mom mentioning that Katie was having trouble adjusting to life with the baby and could use more help. Subtle hints that maybe I could come by more often, help out with things the way I used to. I visited exactly once for my father's birthday in September. The house felt smaller and more chaotic than I remembered. Ryan looked exhausted. Katie seemed overwhelmed, and my parents appeared to have aged 5 years and 6 months. "The twins look great," Mom said, watching Lily and Owen play in the backyard with their usual energy and enthusiasm. "They seem so confident." "They are confident," I said. "Kids do better when they feel secure and valued." "We always valued them," Dad protested. "Did you?" I asked, because I remember Marcus getting a $400 high chair while you questioned whether Owen really needed his asthma medication. The visit was awkward but civil. Ryan barely spoke to me. Katie was polite but distant, and my parents seemed to be walking on eggshells. But what struck me most was how easily the twins readjusted to being quieter and more careful when they were there, as if some part of them still remembered that this house required them to be smaller versions of themselves. Can we go home now? Lily asked after about 2 hours. This used to be your home too, Mom said sadly. No, Lily replied with 10-year-old honesty. This was just where we lived for a while. The really interesting development started in October. Angela heard it through the hospital grapevine first, then it became general knowledge around town. Ryan and Katie were getting divorced. Apparently, the stress of living with his parents combined with financial pressure from the renovation and Ryan's general inability to handle adult responsibilities without someone else managing the details had destroyed their marriage. Katie had filed for divorce and moved back in with her own parents, taking Marcus with her. He's devastated, Mom told me during one of her increasingly frequent phone calls. He really thought they could work things out. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. Divorce is hard, especially when children are involved. The thing is, Mom continued, he's having trouble managing everything on his own. The house renovation, his work schedule, the custody arrangements with Marcus. He could really use some help. There it was, the real reason for the call. What kind of help, I asked. Well, you always were so good at organizing things, handling logistics. Maybe you could help him figure out his finances or drive him to some of his meetings with the lawyers and contractors. I was quiet for so long that she said my name twice to make sure I was still there. Mom, I said finally, do you remember what happened 6 months ago? That was different, she said quickly. That was about living arrangements. This is about family, helping family, family helping family. I repeated like when my family helped me by moving my children into a basement. That kind of help. You're never going to forgive us for that, are you? I've already forgiven you, I said, but forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to repeat the same patterns that hurt my children before. The truth was, watching Ryan struggle with the consequences of his choices didn't give me the satisfaction I might have expected, but it did give me clarity about why I'd been right to leave when I did. The final confrontation came in November, almost exactly a year after Marcus was born and 7 months after we'd moved out. Dad called me at work, something he'd never done before, and I knew immediately that something had gone very wrong. You need to come home, he said without preamble. We need to have a family meeting. I am home, I said. I live in my own house now, remember? You know what I mean. Your mother is having a breakdown. Ryan is falling apart, and we need your help to fix this family. What exactly do you think I can fix? Everything he said, and the desperation in his voice was unmistakable. Ever since you left, everything has been falling apart. Your mother cries every day. Ryan can't handle his responsibilities. We're all miserable. That evening, against my better judgment, I drove to my parents' house for what they'd called an emergency family meeting. Ryan was there looking haggard and defeated in a way I'd never seen before. Mom's eyes were red from crying, and Dad seemed to have aged another 5 years since September. Thank you for coming, Mom said, as if I'd done them an enormous favor by showing up to my own family crisis. What's this about, I asked, settling into the chair that used to be mine at the kitchen table. It's about us needing you, Dad said bluntly. This family doesn't work without you. I looked around the table at 3 adults who seemed to be waiting for me to solve problems I hadn't created. Explain what you mean by that. Ryan finally spoke up. I can't do this alone, he said. The divorce, the custody schedule, with Marcus managing the house renovation, keeping up with work. I'm drowning and I need help. What kind of help? The kind you always provided, Mom said. You were always the organized one, the responsible one. You knew how to handle complicated situations and keep everyone on track. Let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. For 7 months, you've all been discovering that your lives are much more difficult without me managing the details and providing unpaid labor, and now you want me to come back and resume that role. It's not like that, Dad protested weakly. Then, what is it like? It's like we're family, Mom said, and families help each other. Families also respect each other, I replied. They consider each other's needs and feelings. They don't move children into basements and then act surprised when their mother objects. We've apologized for that, Ryan said. No, you haven't. Not once. You've explained it, justified it, minimized it, but you've never actually apologized for it. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Fine, Ryan said finally. I'm sorry we moved your kids to the basement. I'm sorry we didn't ask you first. Is that what you want to hear? What I want to hear, I said standing up from the table, is that you understand why what you did was wrong. But you don't understand that, do you? You're sorry it caused a problem, not sorry it hurt my children. Your children are fine, Mom said. They seem happy and confident when we see them. They are happy and confident because they live in a home where they matter, where their needs are considered, where they don't have to compete with a baby for basic dignity and respect. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard where Lily and Owen used to play before it became too risky to make noise that might wake Marcus. Do you want to know what I've learned this year? I asked, turning back to face them. I've learned that I don't need this family nearly as much as this family needs me. I've learned that my children and I can build a perfectly happy life without constantly accommodating other people's poor choices and expecting nothing in return. What's not fair, I said, is that for 35 years I've been the family member who sacrifices, accommodates, and manages everyone else's problems while my own needs get dismissed as inconvenient. What's not fair is that my children learn to see themselves as less important than their cousin because the adults in their lives taught them that lesson every single day. So you'll never help us again, Dad asked. No matter what happens, I'll help you the way family members help each other. I said with mutual respect, clear boundaries, and genuine consideration for everyone involved, but I will never again sacrifice my children's well-being for your convenience. And if we can't accept those terms, Mom asked, then I guess you'll figure out how to solve your own problems the way I figured out how to solve mine. I drove home to find the twins doing homework at our kitchen table, their artwork covering the refrigerator, their voices filling our house with the sound of children who knew they belonged exactly where they were. That was the last family meeting I attended. Over the following months, I heard through relatives that Ryan eventually moved back into his partially renovated house, learned to manage his own custody schedule, and slowly developed the adult skills he'd never needed while everyone else handled his responsibilities. Katie remarried someone with better financial prospects, and Marcus split his time between two homes where he was genuinely wanted rather than used as a weapon in family power struggles. My parents learned to cook for two people again, manage their own household without unpaid help, and fill their time with activities that didn't depend on their children's availability to provide emotional labor. As for me, I got promoted again, bought better furniture for our house, and started dating a kind man who thinks my independence is attractive rather than threatening. The twins call him by his first name and seem to enjoy having another adult around who respects their space and opinions. We still see my parents occasionally, but on our terms with clear expectations and firm boundaries. They've learned that access to their grandchildren comes with treating their grandchildren and their mother with basic respect. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty about how everything unfolded, but then I watch Lily perform in her school concert or see Owen score a goal in basketball. And I remember that the best gift I ever gave my children was teaching them that they deserve to be valued for who they are, not for how much inconvenience they're willing to accept. That lesson was worth everything it cost to learn it.